Hello and welcome to Future Procurement. My name is Robert Freeman, and today on the direct call from New York, on the Skype call, we have a great guest, Silvia Hodges Silverstein. Hello, Silvia.
Hello, Robert. How are you?
Great. Silvia is the Executive Director in Buying Legal Council, the international trade organization for legal procurement. Did I say it correct, Silvia?
Yes. I'm the Executive Director of the Buying Legal Council, which is the trade association for professionals tasked with sourcing legal services and for managing supplier relationships. And we do that through networking, education, research, and advocacy.
Wow, great introduction. And before we really jump in this very interesting area, what we discussed a little bit before we started this interview, that we will build our discussion today around sourcing legal services and managing legal services supplier relationships. But before we really jump into the area, can you shortly introduce yourself and some of your background?
I'm happy to, and thank you for having me on the show. So as I said, I lead the Buying Legal Council, and our members are procurement professionals or professionals working in legal departments really around the world. And they are, as I said, tasked with sourcing legal services and really helping the legal department to bring in procurement thought into the buying of legal services. A few more words perhaps about myself. I'm also an adjunct professor at Fordham Law School and Columbia Law School in New York, where I teach the law students about business, finance, and management. So all the things that I think they should really understand to be better lawyers and deliver good service for the right price. That's what I do there. I also authored and edited different books on legal service procurement. One of them, the Legal Procurement Handbook. And most recently, we published the book for law firms actually called Winning Proposals. So they understand what it is that procurement actually wants from them. I also co-authored Harvard Business School case studies on procurement and the legal sector, including really the only case study on professional service procurement. It's called GlaxoSmithKline Sourcing Complex Professional Services, and it's really centered on what it is that the pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline does in terms of getting legal services for a lower price, and actually with a factor of predictability of what they're paying built in, and they're using electronic, reverse auctions and all these things. So this was really exciting material to work with. So,
wow. Just maybe a clarifying question for myself. Do you feel yourself more about sourcing or procurement, or do you feel yourself more about legal? Where do you have more passion?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think I sort of have a tripod in all the areas, and I think it's really necessary because, as you know, legal procurement is something relatively new. So right. I had been researching purchasing behavior in the legal sector for 15 plus years, and when I started around 2003, 2004 with my first researches on how clients bought legal services, I'd spoken with many in-house lawyers and CFOs and CEOs, and then I believe it was in 2010 I discovered legal procurement for the first time. They were involved in sourcing legal services, and I thought, like, what? What's going on here? Yeah. So I researched it in more detail, and I looked at other professional services, and I thought, you know, Robert, in your life, sometimes you just know when you're onto something. And I remember it was April 2010. I know it was like legal procurement is going to be a thing. So I started to organize get-togethers of legal procurement professionals to connect them because they didn't necessarily know each other, and give them a possibility to share best practices. And then at some point in time, they asked me to start the organization, which, you know, as I said, is the Buying Legal Council.
Fantastic. So what is legal procurement in a wider sense? What it is for you, if our listeners are wondering?
Well, let me get back for a moment to, procurement typically sees legal as a last frontier category, as something very challenging, if not an intimidating category.
Exactly.
But in the last 5 to 8 years, we've really seen that the general counsel and their legal departments, they're no longer the only buyers of corporate legal services. You definitely see procurement people reporting to the CPO or reporting to the CFO, and just with a dotted line to the legal department.
Yeah.
They bring in the procurement processes, the procurement tools, the procurement skills, etc., and so forth. Really, bringing in this thinking, this logic that has worked in other areas, in other categories, to this until then. I don't want to call it necessarily unmanaged category, but it definitely has not seen the scrutiny perhaps that other professional services areas have seen, whether we talk about engineering or about auditing or about management consulting. As you know, Robert, procurement has been starting to be introduced and involved in all these other professional services, and it was really only legal that was sort of like, no, you can't do this, can't touch this, exactly. It's legal, it's different. So, but that has changed.
So can it be a separate category? And if so, what is special about this category? What makes it so different?
So when I look at our members, which are typically very large companies with major legal spend, and particularly it's the big pharma companies, it's the big banks, it's the big insurance companies and so on. But really, in general, it's the large corporations who bring in procurement because they spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars or euros worldwide on legal. And so is it different? In the sense, it is different that we've done a number of annual researches, which actually just published last week, our 2018 legal procurement survey. And we definitely found that in order to succeed in this category, you definitely have to have worked in it for a while. So it's definitely not a quick career stint, that you're saying, I'm going to work in this category for a year or two and manage it and leave my mark. I don't think that really makes for sustainable change and success. You might be able to win some or have some wins through some low-hanging fruits that you might see as a procurement professional, maybe renegotiating some contracts or reducing the number of suppliers, so a little convergence process. But I think, actually, the numbers in the findings in our survey definitely show that the longer you are in the legal category, and we found that it's really like 5 or more years in the legal procurement category that you then see big successes. So with double-digit percent in savings. So that's definitely a very likely scenario.
So expertise is very important here, right?
Expertise. Yes, and really building trust with the legal department, building trust with your outside counsel, with your legal service providers, with the law firms, and really also being able to talk the talk. Legal, just like every area, has its own jargon, so that you understand what it means. And because there's definitely, how can I say, something going on in the category where if you don't know what this or that legal terminology means, then they're kind of like, okay, thanks, but no thanks. So they initially, they're not necessarily always that embracing of procurement, but I guess it's like that probably or procurement has faced that no matter what category we entered, it's initially a little bit more of a struggle, but I can tell you, Robert, that it's definitely getting better. And we've really seen, as I said, a much more active, proactive approach to legal spend management.
Fantastic. So, Silvia, now going a little bit deeper, can you elaborate what is included in sourcing legal services? What are the things that you consider to be in your area or in your scope?
Well, as I said, one of the big areas is definitely to help the legal department source the right suppliers for the right amount of money, and making sure that they deliver within budget and at the right time. So that's definitely a big area, helping with the RFPs and all that good stuff, and then managing the relationship afterwards. Another big area is definitely the different legal spend management initiatives, because when we look at what legal departments traditionally have done, I would say it's more of a passive management approach to legal spend. So they might develop policies or procedures that encourage some self-regulation of spend management, but they don't really take much direct influence on the benefits and savings. So I think it's really upon legal procurement, to make it a more active management approach, so that the legal department, with procurement's help, actively engages with outside counsel to make sure these policies and procedures that are established are followed, and the benefits and the savings are actually realized. And I would say it's still early days, but we have some of our members and companies that actually have reached a point where you can talk about a collaborative management, where the buyer and supplier side actually jointly develop things. So really more strategic partnerships that you might see in the more mature spend or in the more mature categories.
Silvia, now maybe is it possible to share some example? Because for me, maybe this question will sound too simple or too primitive for you, but I really haven't worked in this area, and for me, I'm just from pure curiosity perspective. How do you really compare the offers in your RFQ or in your tender process? Is it really possible to describe the scope of work, to have a really good and how do you say, detailed specification, so you really can compare the offers from different vendors?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a very good point. Comparing apples to apples is really, really important and really a crucial point of what procurement needs to do in the legal category. Scoping. So really sitting down and thinking through it, what should be part of a matter? What should be, what assumptions do we make? If it's a big transaction, who are the different players that are involved? What are our business objectives and so on? Or if it's a litigation, what do we think that the other side will do? Those things really have to be looked at in detail. And then, you have to give out your assumption then and that's something that procurement, as you can imagine, should definitely do together with the legal department. It's not something that procurement should do by itself. But once you have that, then discuss it with or give outside counsel your assumptions, and then see what they come up with. And we've seen that many times that one of the typical steps is that when you have an RFP out, that you ask the in-house lawyers, who are the, I don't know, 5 or 10 law firms that you think are able to do this. In terms of, you asked me for examples, I mean, I can briefly maybe talk about different legal spend management initiatives that would be of interest for your listeners. So we actually put together a procurement matrix, which really puts them in different initiatives in a 2x2 grid, where you can see, okay, so how long does it take to achieve the benefits with a certain initiative, and what's the change management require? So is it relatively easy to implement, or either technically or politically this is something easier or harder? And then also we looked at, is the initiative likely to deliver greater cost savings or smaller ones? So as in terms of examples, so one of the relatively short and involving relatively little change management is establishing or refining outside counsel guidelines. So really looking at what is it that the company is willing to pay for, and basically outside counsel guidelines should provide outside counsel with the client's expectations regarding billing procedures. So they would identify not only what tasks and expenses are they're willing to pay for, but what kind of format is used for outside counsel billing. And I should probably mention that in the legal category, there's a lot of e-billing, electronic billing going on that has certain rules. And if the law firm submits an invoice through an electronic billing system that does not conform with those outside counsel guidelines that were established and put in the system, then the invoice is basically pushed back immediately. Okay. Establishing, if it hasn't already been establishing or finding outside counsel guidelines, that is a very important step. And then also implementing invoice reviews, because obviously once you have established those outside counsel guidelines, you need to see that they're actually been followed, and making sure that we don't just agree on some rules, but they're actually, as I said, followed through. Second initiative would really center on what kind of approach do you take to law firm selection and management. So, in other words, do you use some sort of RFP approach, or do you do it in a more formalized, controlled approach that is more consistent, which would include, as we mentioned, matter scoping, working with the legal department and establishing which firms should be approached, using competitive processes such as RFPs, tenderings, and perhaps even auctions. What negotiation processes you used, and what are your success criteria. And just really making sure that you record it all, and all the underlying assumptions, and you really track and update this document during the whole time. And then another one is rate and timekeeper management. So because one thing is really important when you work with law firms, if you, for example, do not have like a fixed fee or a flat fee with the firm, but they give you hourly rates, and then you might have been able to negotiate a discount. Well, that's maybe okay, but you really have to actually look at also at how many hours they bill you and what level. So, for example, if you have lots of partner time, or do you have lots of associate time, or do you have lots of paralegal time? So, really making sure that this is all managed, including annual rate increases and intake and approval of new timekeepers and so on. So that would be part of that. I'm just going to briefly mention a few more things. So that matter: level budgeting and project management, very important. And I've seen lots of gained lots of interest in the last few years in legal. Then unbundling or alternative sourcing strategies, so that you say, okay, I'm not just going to give the whole matter to a law firm, but like which part needs to be done by a really high expertise expert, which one has to be by the expert, and which is something more administrative. So maybe like the legal equivalent of a BPO can do it, which is
yeah, so it's very similar methodology, or many very similar tools you are using to.
Absolutely. Okay. It's basically procurement tools used just for the legal category. It's absolutely, there's no reason why it's not possible to do.
Very interesting. And one thing that I'm again curious to know: negotiating the prices with legal companies, with legal firms, is it any different comparing to, I don't know, let's say FMCG or some wholesaler negotiations?
In the legal sector, and it really depends on the jurisdiction that you're looking at. So typically the most costly market is the US. Okay. So for almost all internationally operating companies, they spend most of their legal budget on the US because litigation costs so much. So I think that's very important to understand. What are the price drivers? What is it that makes something expensive? And I can tell you, Robert, there's so many tools out there now that really help procurement understand, what makes something expensive and risky, and what is it that they can do to make sure that the quality is good. Because the thing is, the legal department is there to manage risks, so to keep the company out of trouble and all that. And sometimes they say, well, just saving a few euros or dollars here or there, then but in the end, if we lose this big case, we should have that's definitely tricky. So I think it's really important to work with the legal department, because we have totally seen that in our survey that I mentioned before, when procurement is involved in the legal in the legal category, on average the company saves 14.6% of legal spend. That's, if you spend hundreds of millions of euros or dollars, that's a lot of money. But what's really interesting is when procurement is well aligned and works in partnership with the in-house legal department, on average they save 21%. Right. That's a big difference. Yeah. So when you look at a big company that incurs legal fees at 1% of revenues, this translates into billions of euros, dollars, or pounds of incremental earnings. So what my big message is to your audience: if you're not already involved in legal, now is the time to begin your legal procurement journey, because, as I mentioned before, it really takes time to drive value. You can't just do a quick stint.
Yeah, and it's just like as you said, that you need to have some expertise in law or in legal matters, let's say, because when you describe these things, I completely understand that only having my procurement hat on, however long experience you have, probably doesn't really help. And first, I don't know, you mentioned 5 years, but first initial years, for sure, you need to understand what are the specific cost drivers and the risky things and things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, so you don't need to have a law degree to get involved in the category. You just really need to have an appetite to say, I want to get into this sort of still semi-exotic category. Yeah, because I think it's really important that once you put your mind to it, then you do your research and understand the market offering, understand who are the players in the market, check out what it is that the law department is doing, how they are currently buying legal services, and how and if they're managing their relationship with outside counsel. And I think it's really important to get to know your colleagues in the law department. And there's so much information now out there. As I said, we have tons of material on the Buying Legal Counsel website, which is buyinglegal.com. And so there are tons of videos and primers and cheat sheets, and you can, when you understand and you're patient and you listen to your colleagues in the legal department, understand what's important to them, what are their goals. Maybe you can find common ground relatively fast, and you can show the value that you can add in a way that doesn't threaten their relationship with outside counsel. Because that's one of the big differences with the legal category, is that most of the in-house lawyers, they worked at these law firms at then hiring. So, it's a much closer relationship that the in-house lawyers have with the outside counsel than, I would argue, than many other categories.
Interesting. Silvia, can you give us a flavor of maybe few typical cost drivers in legal procurement?
So it depends kind of on the market, but so if we're looking at matters, so the thing that definitely drives cost is the longer it takes, the more it will cost. Okay. So managing time is definitely important. Then not being aligned with the law firm in terms of what is the outcome, the desired outcome, that drives costs. And then if we look at individual rates of the individual hourly rates of lawyers, that we found what are typically the drivers are the location of the law firm / the lawyer. So you pay much more for a lawyer, say in London or New York, than you would pay for a lawyer maybe in a secondary market. So even, let's say in the UK, you pay much more for a lawyer who's based in London than a lawyer who's based maybe in Bristol or Birmingham. And in the US, it's the same. You pay much more for a lawyer who's based in Manhattan than a lawyer who's based in Denver or in Atlanta. And so really thinking, do I really need a lawyer from this location? And sometimes you might, but not always. And then also we have found in researches that we have done, the size of the law firm also has some indication on how much is charged per hour. And then also whether it's a partner or an associate, you pay more for a partner. So those are typical cost drivers that you need to look at.
Interesting. Some parallels. I'm trying to draw some parallels with manufacturing or retail that I was working with, and still it's similar. I mean, there are the cheaper labor countries, and there are more expensive labor. Still not exactly same things, but some of the logic from my experience I can also extrapolate to
absolutely right.
Interesting. And Silvia, moving on to some more questions that I have prepared. Can you share with us some more? You mentioned some of the risks or hidden risks, not really obvious factors connected to legal services and managing legal services, and also supplier relationships?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, as I mentioned, to get to know your colleagues in the legal department to earn their trust.
Okay.
Because if legal doesn't want to work with you, and particularly if the GC, the general counsel, doesn't think that having procurement involved, if he or she thinks that it's not a good idea, you have almost no chance to succeeding. So hopefully you're brought on because the CEO or CFO, that's typically a scenario that the CEO and CFO say that it's a good idea for procurement helping the legal department. So that's almost a sine qua non. You need to make sure that that's the case, and really understanding how are your colleagues in the in-house legal department, how are they being measured, what's important to them, so that you don't tell them, oh, I helped you save 20 million euros. I mean, if they're not measured at all on saving money, but only on winning, let's say, a litigation, well, Robert, people, and I think it was Peter Drucker who said, whatever you measure and reward, that's what gets done. So you really need to understand that. So again, really understanding that you might be able to negotiate down something, but if they feel like you compromise the quality of the advice received or the achieved outcomes, unfortunately, that will not get you anywhere. So I think that's really important as one aspect, and the other aspect is really understanding the legal marketplace very well to know what are the offerings and to know what are the trends and what's possible, what tools are available today.
Because probably it's a fine line for average person like me between pushing too hard and going down in quality of services and really decreasing the price or the price of the service. So interesting. Silvia, can you share with us some of the good examples, maybe recent examples that you are really proud of your projects?
Yeah, so we had as I said, the survey was just out this week, and it's buyinglegal.com/survey where people can download it, and the legal spend management primer that I mentioned, you can also download that at buyinglegal.com/LSM for legal spend management, LSM.
Probably
and
it would be good if you will send me the link, and I will attach
I
it
will.
to show notes.
I'll be happy
show
to.
Notes, dear listeners, please check. Good.
Perfect. Yeah, and then we have an annual awards, a legal procurement award, and the different winners of the awards really showed a very sophisticated approach to legal procurement. So definitely not just looking at let's say the discounts, but really help the legal department in a more holistical way to manage legal spend. And so when we look at what's the procurement professional's job in legal today, it's definitely about issuing the RFPs and outside counsel billing guidelines, establishing panels and lists of professional suppliers, requiring e-billing, negotiating fee arrangements, and really applying a tool chest of process improvements. And so those to really see the industry, the legal category to evolve since I've been monitoring it, that is really exciting. And when we looked at one of the questions in our survey was, what is the top procurement goal for the legal category for 2018? It's about better capturing and analyzing spend data, as well as you might imagine, reducing legal spend.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about the last sentence? What does it mean? What does it involve?
Yeah, so because of the electronic billing that is used, legal in more and more markets. So it's not available in all jurisdictions. So it's not available everywhere. But in more and more markets where big companies work with law firms, as I said, they require electronic billing. So they will have spend data. They will know all sorts of things about how long how a certain type of matter should cost, how it should be staffed, as I said before, what the cost drivers are and so on. So it's really a much more sophisticated approach to saying, okay, so given our assumptions here and our business goals, this is the route that we think we should take. And so that you sit as partners at the table and discuss that, and then really make sure that, let's say, if you have a budget for a certain matter, that the law firm will not work for the next 9-12 months and then says, oh, we went over budget back in November. Oops, that's obviously not our approach that works, but that you really have a partnership and you look for efficiencies together. And sometimes it might be the legal department or the buyer itself that needs to make some changes to make it possible that the law firm or the legal service provider can deliver to these prices. So it's really a much more business process oriented approach.
I like it a lot, and it's really, really inspiring what you say, and it's far more complicated than it looks from the first glance, and I really, really like how deep you go in it.
Thank you.
Right. Silvia, now we are moving closer to the end of this episode. I know that you have another meeting after our talk. Maybe in the end of our discussion, can you share some practical advice for our listeners who maybe, as me, talk the first time or listen the first time about this category, if I call it? Can I call it category?
I would think so, yeah, absolutely.
What are your a few advice on sourcing legal services for people who have a very limited idea about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are many legal spend management initiatives, for example, that clients can undertake, ranging from simple process or policy changes to more complex and comprehensive programs. As I said, each initiative can deliver cost savings for the organization and offer certain performance benefits. And I think it's important that procurement professionals who jump into this category, even if it's new for them, have an understanding of what these different initiatives, how long they take, and if they are better or less suitable for a certain culture than others, and then just maybe really make it a point to spend time with your colleagues in the legal department, get to know them, understand maybe what the things are that they don't like doing. And I can tell you, we used to say that law school is a school where people go if they're really smart, but they don't necessarily like math so much. I'm not saying that lawyers are bad at math, but typically procurement people are really, really good at analytics and quantitative things. So they might be very happy if you help them with doing data crunching and doing these kind of quantitative analysis, as well as negotiating. Because one thing you have to keep in mind, they have normally very close relationships, as I mentioned, to outside counsel. And so talking with them about price, that's really an uncomfortable or a scenario. So if you can be the bad cop a little bit, that's perfectly fine as well. Yes. So I think, there's so much to be gained from working in this category, and it's growing, and it's really exciting. So if you don't mind some sleepless nights studying something new, that's the area you should go into.
Otherwise, if you hesitate, talk to Silvia Hodges Silverstein.
Well, I would say definitely go to buyinglegal.com, check out all the things. It's a really exciting community, and as I said, it's not gonna go away. Procurement is here to stay, also in legal, and so it's fascinating. You can still be like we call people veterans if they've been in the category for 5 years or more. So where can you be a veteran in any category of 5 years? So if you want to make a name for yourself, this is your category.
Really, really interesting. And thank you once again, Silvia, for so fascinating interview. And it's really nice how you combine. You said that people in legal departments don't like math so much, and I think you are a great combination of combining the analytical skills.
Now I'm in trouble.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe
good.
I will cut it out, or maybe not. Okay.
Thank
you so much for your time, and thank
much.
you so much for your great advice.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this episode. I really enjoyed this interview with Silvia Hodges Silverstein, the Executive Director at Buying Legal Counsel. Really interesting interview, many insights for myself, and pay attention, dear listeners, that in the show notes to this episode you will find the links to Legal Procurement Survey findings and also to Legal Spend Management Primer. And by the way, in the show notes to this episode you will also find the special conditions to purchase Strategic Cost Management course from Future Procurement with myself there, with a great discount, 73%. So please use your chance to have a great discount. One of my best courses online. As always, write us your questions on email, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever you will find our podcast. My name is Robert Freeman, and this is Future Procurement. We talk to you soon.